What is that?
So EMDR is the abbreviation for eye movement desensitization and reprocessing.
Mhm.
It is a therapeutic approach that was developed by someone called Francine Shapiro, who is a wonderful human being who unfortunately passed away just a couple of years ago. But she developed this approach essentially as a way of healing trauma. So what we know about the brain, first of all, let me say this. Trauma, as we used to define it, we used to think of trauma as military, right? Veterans, first responders, that we could look at something and say, oh my gosh, that person's had so much trauma, experienced so much trauma. What we have come to know in the last 20, 30 years or so is that trauma exists outside of just those big moments. We would call those big T trauma, major developmental moments that anyone would look at and say, that was traumatic. We also now identify what we call small t or little t trauma, which is more developmental trauma. It's more the little things that happened over the course of your life. Perhaps, your parents divorcing, or perhaps, you grew up with a parent that experienced, alcoholism, or perhaps you moved a whole bunch of times, or any kind of little innocuous moments that perhaps to the outsider might not have seemed really significant, but to that little person, it flooded their nervous system, and it taught them something about themselves and the world that was really fundamentally not true. So whether that be, I'm not safe, I'm not good enough, right? Whatever that kind of belief is of self. So trauma is any time the nervous system is overwhelmed or flooded with emotions and sensations. So I could probably identify a couple times in the last month where my nervous system has been overwhelmed. The vast majority of those moments get processed out naturally through the body. So if you ever have an experience where you just feel really kind of activated and lit up, but you go to bed and the next day you feel a little bit better, right? It doesn't impact you so much. That's your body and your brain doing what it knows how to do. It's processing out that experience. There are some moments in time that don't get processed out. And we know that they don't, because if you were to think of them, your body responds like it's happening all over again. Those are the moments in time that we know.
And people get panic attack and stuff like that.
Absolutely. So a panic attack would be a perfect example of that. The body is responding to something that happened in the past. Right? It's not necessarily responding to something that is a danger in the present moment, but the body remembers. So when we sleep, we process out most of the sensory input we've taken in during the day. And the kind of most significant kind of processing time we have is during our REM sleep, right? Which REM stands for rapid eye movement. And so during that part of our sleep, our eyes kind of flutter back and forth. And that is just a byproduct of both sides of our brain working really, really hard to kind of process information. It's like the brain kind of goes online and both sides are working. And just as a byproduct, our eyes flutter. So basically what Francine discovered is that you can recreate this environment of lighting up your brain by asking you to move your eyes back and forth.
Gotcha. Okay.
So by creating what we call bilateral stimulation, so activating both sides of the brain back and forth, we can kind of create that online environment that makes your brain, if you like, extra absorbent, extra ready for processing information. So that's where EMDR came from. So we kind of target specific moments in time, and then we utilize and we use bilateral stimulation alongside kind of very kind of short bursts of asking the client to sit with that moment, notice the sensations with that moment, and then we pause and we say, what are you noticing? And the client might say, I'm noticing my heart's racing. And then I, as a therapist, would say, yeah, just go with that. Notice that. We'll do some more eye movements. Pause. What are you noticing now?
And what are these eye movements? Is it a is there like a pattern to this, or?
Yeah. So essentially the way it's taught is that I would be sat facing you, which I want to be careful with the microphone, but I would just hold my fingers up like this and I would move my fingers back and forth like that. So this is how it was originally taught. We now, in the age of kind of virtual therapy, there are platforms that you can use where I kind of have controls. A little ball moves back and forth. There's also light bars you can buy. So it's just a big long bar where a light goes back and forth.
Mm-hmm.
And we also have since discovered that there are multiple types of bilateral stimulation that are helpful. So not just eye movement. So you can have auditory, beeping back and forth in your ears. We oftentimes do tactile bilateral stimulation. So a client might just tap alternately on their legs, or I even have these little buzzers that the client holds and they just buzz back and forth.
Okay.
So really, the eye movement piece is really only, one component of the possible bilateral stimulation options. It is the, teaching eye movement is kind of teaching fidelity to the original model, the eye movement desensitization reprocessing, but other types of bilateral stimulation are effective.
Gotcha.